This is the Seller Process Podcast, where we talk about the best systems, processes, and SOPs for your Amazon business so that you can regain control of your time, build up your team, and scale your e-com empire.
Hello, entrepreneurs. Gianmarco here, and welcome to the show. This episode has all the prerequisites to be an epic one, because we're going to talk about a very powerful yet so simple method that helped me personally to multiply my efficiency and productivity. Plus, it gave me more awareness on how to improve my business operations. I'm talking about time tracking. It's not about time management. We'll see in a moment what do we really mean by that. But another reason why I'm so excited today about this episode is that we'll hear time tracking directly from the mother of time tracking, the efficiency expert, Adrienne Dorison. She's the co-founder of Run Like Clockwork, alongside with her business partner, Mike Michalowicz, where she equips CEOs to design a business and a team that can run like clockwork. They have a best-selling book titled Clockwork that details the specific framework you need to remove yourself from the day-to-day of your business operations. Adrienne has spent the past 10 plus years in the field of operational efficiency and has since created the most simplistic approach to making your business ultra efficient. Hello, Adrienne. Now the mic is yours.
Hello, I'm excited to be here. Thank you for having me, and thanks for sharing efficiency with your community.
Sounds great. So, Adrienne, let's be efficient ourselves in this episode. Let's dive right into the main topic. What do we mean when we say time tracking, and why it is so important?
Yes. So time tracking is literally writing down every activity that you are doing throughout your week and throughout your day, with being specific with how much time you're actually spending on it. So we'll have you write the activity, we'll have you write what time you started, what time you stopped. And then later we'll go and classify it by some different activity types so that we can look deeper at those activities. But we have our clients do that for at least 5 days, once a quarter. So we want to get a really good idea of where your time is going. I think that most entrepreneurs have a good idea of where their money is going, but we have a very loose idea of where our time is going. Like, we think we know until we do the time tracking and get really granular. And I mean, like, you want to be as specific as possible on that time tracking document so that we can actually do something with it, right? We don't just want to write, we wrote emails. It's like, well, what kind of emails, right? So like what kind of meeting were we in? Like, what kind of work were we actually doing, so that we can be really specific with how we want to improve those activities. So a lot of our clients don't love this part of the journey, but it is like the most important data collection that we can do to start improving the entire business.
Yeah, absolutely. I've done that by myself for my business, and I've learned a lot. What do you think people actually learn when they do time tracking? And they are scared at the beginning to do it, but then once they do it, they learn so much. So what's typically they learn? Yeah,
they're nervous because I think for a couple of reasons, right? Like, people feel like maybe they actually know they're not spending their time where they really should be. And so it's this level of transparency that they have to come to terms with. They have to really see it for what it is when they have to write it down. You know, they have to be accountable to it, right? And the other thing is that it does take a little bit of time. Like, when you're trying to just go from one thing to the next and one thing to the next, and you're busy in your day, you can make up a lot of excuses or reasons why you don't have the time to time track those things. It's like, well, that's probably a really good reason that we need to, right? Like, why are we so jam-packed that we can't even document and get good data on like where our time is actually going? I would say the number one thing that people learn from this activity is just a really clear sense of awareness that they did not have before of where their time is actually going. Because a lot of people think that they know, but until you are tasked with really writing it down and being accountable to it, you really don't know. And that's why we also do it. Like, our team still does this once a quarter because new things pop up or new things end up on your plate. And so even though I've done it before, I think I know what's on my plate, or I think I have a good idea. You really don't, or you really don't have a good idea of how long things are maybe taking you, because we can also justify and talk ourselves into continuing to do things because we think, oh, it doesn't take me that much time, or it's just easier if I do it myself. But then when you have the time tracking, you're like, wow, like that took me way longer than it should have, or way longer than I need to be spending on it. Or the other awareness comes from recognizing that you get interrupted a lot or you're really distracted, right? Like, which are two things that are super normal, like really normal to get interrupted a lot as you have a team, that you're growing that team. Really normal to get distracted because we live in a tech world where we're constantly bouncing from one app to another. It's very normal for us to even do that out of habit. Like, I was talking to my husband on the phone the other day and he was like, we were waiting for a doctor actually to come into a room. And he's like, I'm literally going from one app to the next in a circle. He's like, nothing new is here, but I can just tell that my mind is like just going from one thing to the next and like checking for a new notification, even though they're not there. It's just like something that we subconsciously do. Right. And so we live in a very distracted world. And so by doing the time track, you can also have a really clear awareness of like, wow, I'm really distracted and I need to maybe put in some better habits or boundaries so that I could be more efficient with my workday and spend the time on the things that I really want to spend my time on, not on things that I'm just subconsciously getting distracted by.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's one of the main thing I've learned actually when I've done time tracking for myself. It was basically the clarity, because when you see it in like black and white, your perception, your initial perception of what you do, it's different from what you actually do. And the time tracking allows you to see what you actually do, not what you just think you do.
Yes.
Exactly.
So true.
That's really the main key point of running a time tracking session. So what that looks like if people want to actually do it, how can they start?
Yeah, so super simple. We use a spreadsheet that we created, but you could create your own. We also, like, if you go to our website, you can get our spreadsheet if you sign up for our free tools. But it's literally just write down the activity. You write down what time you started the activity and what time you stopped the activity. And do that for every single thing that you do throughout the day. Try to do that for at least 5 days. They don't have to be consecutive days, right? So they could be randomized. If you miss a day, it's totally fine. If you miss an entire afternoon, totally fine. Do it the next week. But just try to get a good chunk of data, right? That's really what we're looking for. It doesn't have to be perfect, but the more data that we have, the better it will be, right? So getting a good chunk of it will help us kind of remove some of the irregularities, because a lot of people are like, oh, like none of my days are normal. So should I wait until, like, no, because none of your days are probably going to be normal. So just get a good sample from different types of days if that works best for you. But literally you're just writing down with as much detail as possible on each of those lines, like what activity you're actually doing, so that it's enough information for you to actually go back, days or weeks later, and then either make a system out of that thing or transfer it to someone else, or be able to eliminate it, or be able to dig in and, figure out how we can improve what we're looking at. But if we're really vague with the activities, it's not going to be good data. Like my statistics teacher in college used to always tell us, like, garbage in is garbage out, right? So like, don't bother doing it if you're going to do it half-assed, right? And not get really good data from it. So be really specific with like what activities you're actually doing throughout the day.
Exactly. So once we fill out this spreadsheet, which actually people will be able to download from the show notes, we'll give a link that they can find the time tracker. And so once we get all this data, what do we do with that? Is it there's a method you use to put in place each of these actions, right? So can you speak a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so we classify the spreadsheet in two different ways. We use a 4D classification, and then we use a 3T classification. So we'll talk about the 4D first, because that is how we need to start, is really understanding what type of work each of those activity is, right? So not all activities are the same type of work that you do throughout the day. So there are 4 different types of work that we use to classify, and we call those the 4 Ds. The first D is doing, and that's if you're actually doing the work. So for example, if you're writing an email, you are doing the work, right? You are actually executing the task. If you are on a sales call, you are actually executing the task. If you are loading the product onto Amazon, you are executing the task. So that would be classified as the doing. The next D is called deciding. And this is one that we coined for the book. It's probably not something you've heard before. And you might think that I'm crazy because you're going to think I'm talking about delegating. But deciding is this like in between work type where you have assigned a task to someone else. When you assign a task to someone else and you still own the decision. So what that means is when they've completed the task or while they're working on the task, they might need you to give them approval about something, or they might need permission to move forward, or they might not know what you want them to do next, or they might need you to tell them, do you want it done this way or that way? They just don't have the autonomy to fully execute the project on their own. And so you are responsible still for making a lot of decisions. So when you're looking at your time tracking, I want you to identify, are there things that I'm deciding, that I'm making decisions for other people on the team, right? The next work type is called delegating. And that's when you have fully assigned the outcome to another individual. And what that means is that now they own all of those decisions, right? So they're responsible for the outcome. It's really clear to them that they're autonomous within their role or within their project. And so they no longer need to come to you to ask a bunch of questions, but they can operate on their own to reach said outcome that you have assigned to them. And so if there are things that show up on your time tracking where you're spending time training someone more fully or giving them clear expectations about the outcome that they're looking for, that would be delegating, right? Like really fully transferring that thing over. The fourth work type is called designing. And this is where we're creating the future of the business. So this is like the strategy or the visionary elements. It's kind of like your thinking time, which sometimes people don't recognize as work, but it is a work type, right? And it's probably the most valuable work type that we can do as CEOs, as business owners, as entrepreneurs. Like the thinking and the idea creation that we do is probably the most valuable thing that we do for the business, but we usually don't get a ton of that available to us throughout our work days, but because we're so entrenched in the doing and the decision-making for other people. And so when design time shows up, whether that's just white space on your calendar, like where you're not back-to-back in meetings or back-to-back doing things, or if you're thinking about the vision of the organization, or if you're thinking about a new strategy for the fall campaign or whatever those things are, like that's the thinking work type, that's the designing. And we actually want to see you spending more time in that space as you start to clockwork and get more efficient with your time.
Absolutely, yeah. And by the way, the decide work type, it's something that maybe will be more relevant for people who already has a team. And obviously for when you're not, maybe most of your time will be a do type of work
yes.
or design, probably.
Yeah. Like if you're the only person on your team, you're probably doing everything right now, right? And so the time tracking will be really helpful for you still to really identify, like, are these things that you should be doing? And could we maybe delegate some of those things to other people so that you could spend your time on more valuable things? But even if you have like VAs or part-time contractors, freelancers, you still might be getting trapped in that deciding. So even if you don't see them as like full-blown team members, or if they're not full-time, like we still classify those as team members because they're doing work for your company, which can still get you trapped in some of those deciding work types. But your time tracking will be really helpful if you get really granular to identify how much time you're actually spending making decisions for other people. That's one thing that, like, I always tell our clients, like, you can't unknow that, right? Like the next time someone comes to you and asks you a question about their work, you're going to be like, oh, this is deciding, like I'm making decisions for them, right? So even if you're not doing a time tracking, this is going to start to become more apparent to you just because you heard me talk about it. Now you have like a term for it. You have a way to classify it, and you're going to be shocked potentially.
Exactly, guys, because time is the most valuable asset that we have. So we need to treat it as it is, a very valuable asset. So we need to make an accounting for that. Usually we make budgets to buy inventory, to run ads and so on. But we never make an inventory of our time. So time tracking is exactly that. We take account of how we are spending time, and then we classify it into 4 types of work, and then we actually work on optimizing that kind of mix. That's why it's called 4D mix.
Yes.
And so what is the ideal 4D mix after people, run their operations and run the session of time tracking? What would look like a really good mix of these work types?
Yeah. So for an entire company, so what we typically have our clients do is they do a time tracking for themselves. And then they also have all of their team members do a time tracking. And then we want to add these, percentages together to get like, what is the team's mix? So if you were the only person on your team, then this will be your ideal mix. But if you have other people on your team, your individual ideal mix should be different than what the company's ideal mix is, right? So the company's ideal mix should be about 80% doing, because doing is what adds value to a marketplace, right? Like that's what makes us valuable as organizations. Like we need to be doing. So 80% doing. We want about 2% deciding. So very low in the deciding. We don't want to be spending a lot of time making decisions for other people. Everyone should be as autonomous as possible. That'll make us more efficient. 8% in delegating as an overall team, right? So spending a bigger chunk of our time really delegating so that people can be more autonomous and understand their outcomes. And then about 10% designing. So as an entire organization, the creating of the future, the strategy. So that's for your entire team, right? So if you are an individual who you are the only person on your team, that would be your goal mix. If you have multiple other people doing some of that doing for you, then your goal should be to look at that mix and see how much time what your mix is in terms of what you're doing, deciding, delegating and designing is, and start moving it towards you doing less doing and deciding and you doing more delegating and designing as the CEO, right? So everyone's will be a little bit different as an individual, but that's what you're shooting for as an entire team.
Right, exactly. That makes everything more clear, absolutely, about how should you spend your time. But I'm curious, how did you came up with this ideal for the mix? Why should we spend 80% on doing things, 20%, 12%, right? What is that? 15% on designing, 8% on delegating, 2% of deciding.
Yeah. So like we need the company to be, doing to add value. And the key here is that as the CEO, you don't need to be the one doing the doing, but someone does, right? Like someone needs to be providing value to our customers or executing the work so they can get their products, et cetera. Deciding is just typically an inefficiency in terms of communication within an organization. And so we want to keep it as low as possible while still being realistic with like people are going to have questions sometimes. And there are times when people are in this like middle phase of really understanding how to get to fully delegated. And so we still need to have a little bit of wiggle room for it as they're growing into you trusting them to make decisions for the organization, but still having a safe space where they can come and ask something if they need to, right? So that's where that like 2% comes from. And then the 8% is I really want people to be spending a higher chunk of their time, like doing the more in-depth training and delegating and being really clear up front with people what the outcomes they're responsible for are, what they can make decisions around, what systems we need to get in place so that they can be able to execute on their roles effectively without coming to me or anyone else on the team with a million questions. So doing that work up front and kind of making sure that, if we're delegating something, we're doing it in a way where it's not going to end up back on our plates. And so front loading that to say, we'd like you to actually spend more time there. And then designing at 10%, because if you're not thinking about the future of the business, then who is, right? Like who is making sure that we're moving forward? Who is looking at the strategy and making sure we're relevant and we're, keeping people in the right roles and making sure the team is really efficient and all of the things that as a CEO, we have to be thinking about to continue to grow the organization. And having at least 10% as an entire organization means that even as the company grows, so we wanted to look at these percentages as this is a team-wide thing. So even as the company continues to grow with team members, your time will likely shift as the CEO into more designing, but the people that are working on your team are going to shift into a lot more of that doing percentage, right? So for example, I might only do 10% of our company's work right now, but I'd probably do 50% design time in terms of what my day-to-day is made up of now. But that's really the best investment of my time. And so we wanted those percentages to work for the entire company and then allow you to make the individual ones work for you as the company continued to grow.
Exactly. So the interesting thing actually about this concept is that you can do time tracking right now and have your current percentage of these four work types, right? And then have your goal, your target for the mix for the future. So right now, maybe you are the one who's doing most of things, right? But you actually target to spend
reduce that,
most of your time in designing, for example.
Yes.
So in that case, you'll need to delegate more and have more team members that take care of the doing parts of the business or the operations, so that you can cover more like a CEO role in your business.
Yeah. So it'll give you the clarity of like, okay, if this is where I am now, what do I need? If I have, 80 or 90% doing, what do I need to change within this organization or within my own time, within my activities in order to get me down to 50% doing, right? That doesn't happen overnight. It happens with really intentional, systematic, and operational changes that you're going to make inside the business. But that awareness is key so that you can say, oh, I'm not actually where I want to be, but here's a path that can help me start moving towards that.
Absolutely. That's why it's very powerful, the time tracking. So after we calculate our 4D mix, how do we basically spend our time? What's the key thing that we need to do? What's the next step that we need to do in order to multiply our efficiency?
Yeah. So if we want to start making improvements from this, there are now we've kind of made 4 things that you can look at in terms of classification of that time, but it's the 3T process, right? So you've classified your 4 Ds. Now we know what type of work it is. Now we have to identify, okay, well, now that we know what type of work it is, we know what the activity is. What do we want to do with that specific activity? How can we make it more valuable for the company? So there's 3 things that you can do with that time to shift it, to make the company improve and make your time even more valuable. The first thing you can do is you can trash it, right? So you can identify as a company, do we need to even do this at all? Or should we just trash it? Should we just get rid of it and see if it changes? A lot of times we continue to do things just because we've always done them. And that is just not an efficient or good reason to continue. So I really want you to question each line item on that time tracking and ask yourself, if we eliminated this, would it change the business negatively? And are there metrics that we could look at to prove that if we really think it would, right? So being able to identify, there might be things that you could just stop doing altogether from that time tracking and nothing would change negatively. And probably there will be opportunity to actually change in a positive direction because we're now freeing up some of that time. So even if you have no team members that you can delegate to, if you're all by yourself on your team, this is something that you can do to actually make your time more valuable for the organization, is identifying what can I just trash? What can I stop doing? And we have clients that free up so much of their time just by getting really critical with this time tracking and saying, yeah, I could probably trash this, or I could test. We always like to say, if you're not completely sure, you can test trash it for a few weeks. If nothing bad happens, great, we can fully eliminate it. If we decide, we do need to add it back in, you can add it back in. But I know that sometimes there comes some resistance with trashing things. And so use that test model if you need to. The second thing you can do with your time is you can trim it. So Parkinson's law states that a task will expand or contract with the amount of time that we give it, which means there are things that are on your plate that are taking more time just because we're giving them more time, right? So if a meeting is set for an hour, it's probably going to last for an hour. If you set it for 45 minutes, it will probably last 45 minutes, right? So same thing when you have different types of work that you do. If you're, if you notice hey, I spend a lot of time, writing copy for products, but maybe I don't really need that much time. Maybe it just takes me that much time because I give myself all day long to do it. But if I gave myself 2 hours to do it, I would be much more efficient with those tasks. So what are some things that you could potentially trim and just spend less time doing if you still, in fact, need to do them, right? So we're always looking first, can we trash it? If we can't trash it, can we trim it? Can we just do less of it, right? The third thing that you can do at that time is you can transfer it. So if we can't trash it, if we can't trim it, and trashing and trimming, you can do both of those things without delegating a single thing without having an additional team member, that can help you free up some time. If we can't do either of those things, or if we've already trimmed it as much as possible, but we really want to ask ourselves, like, okay, it still needs to be done, but does it need to be done by me, right? And if it does not need to be done by me, we're going to mark it as transfer. We're going to transfer it to someone else. Even if you do not have that person on your team yet, it's still really good on the time tracking sheet to identify that in the future, this is not something that really should stay on your plate. And so you're going to mark that as transfer so that it's something that you can in the future or currently, like maybe you already have someone that can do it, but you're going to actually delegate that to someone else. The fourth T that we've added in recent years is just called treasure. And that's really the ones that we want you to identify, like, as what are the things that are most valuable for you to truly be doing, the things that you should keep on your plate, the things that, you know, are the highest value for you as, you know, the CEO or the business owner to be working on, right? And typically you love those things, or you are you're best at those things in terms of adding value to the entire organization by you doing them. So mark the ones that you're like, yeah, this is really worth me keeping. I can't transfer it to someone else in the future. I don't need to. And so you'll mark each of the activities with, is it trash? Is it trim? Is it transfer? Or is it a treasure? And then we have to start actually executing on some of those things, right? Trashing things, trimming things, transferring things.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it's a really powerful method, and I've been using it for myself. And just to let you guys know, like, full disclosure, I've been part of one of the Adrienne's coaching program, which is called the Run Like Clockwork Accelerator, which I'm still part of because you know, to learn basically ways and methods like this one that we're sharing with you today, for basically increase the efficiency of my business, which definitely give me lots of very interesting methods like this one and many others. So I went through this method myself, and I believe that I probably double or tripled my efficiency after I've done the first session of time tracking. And one thing I will do also, you guys will find in the show notes, it's gonna be like I'm gonna give you some examples, like real life examples that I used to for the 4D mix and also the 3T that we just spoke about. I will give you some real examples of what you can trash, what you can dream, and what you can treasure also, and also about the 4D mix. I will give you like examples of how can that apply to your Amazon business. Nice. And so Adrienne, so just the last couple of questions before we say goodbye. What do you think is the most common mistake that people make during their time tracking?
Yeah, I think the number one mistake is not doing it. Like, people avoid it and they think it's going to be too hard, or they think they know already what they do throughout the week. And so that's like the biggest thing, is like, get yourself to do it. And then once people do it, I think the biggest mistake I see is two things. One, not being specific enough with each task. So just being really generic. And then when we go back to, you know, maybe transfer something or decide if we can trash it, it doesn't make sense, because it's like, well, I checked emails. It's like, well, what type of emails are these, right? Are these all emails? Are these newsletter emails? Are these emails with your vendors, right? So being as specific as possible within those things, so that we can actually put it to action in terms of changing what we're doing with those things. And then, yeah, the mistake of doing the time tracking. So putting in all this work and then classifying all these things, but then not taking any action with it and actually trashing something and getting rid of it, or not actually trimming it and putting those boundaries around yourself, or saying like, oh, I should transfer this, but it's just easier for me to do it myself, so I'll just keep doing it. And so it's like knowing what these things need to change into, but then not actually making some of those changes. And so taking action on it, like the action isn't, the value isn't like, there is some value in doing the actual time tracking. Like we said, like there's awareness there, but the real value comes from being able to shift your time, right? Which requires action on the back end of that. And so making sure that you follow through with it after you do it, so that it becomes a really valuable tool for you and the team.
Right. And for the techies, like people who would like to make the time tracking through some software or tools, what do you suggest them to use?
Yeah, we've seen some of our clients. So we have that spreadsheet that I think is really helpful because it does have like the buckets where you can classify doing, deciding, and the three T's. And then we have some things on that spreadsheet that will auto calculate like your mix, and it will auto calculate how much time you can trash and trim and transfer. And so we've made that spreadsheet a little more tech friendly for you. So try to use that. But if you really want to use a tracking tool, we've had clients use Toggle, which is an easy one, as well as Clockify. Those are two common ones that I hear people using. But just make sure that you can then, get that data and do something useful with it, the way that we use the spreadsheet. I just wouldn't want that data to then just sit there, right? And so we have built some of those things into the spreadsheet, but if you can build them into Clockify or Toggle, go for it and do that.
Absolutely. I've been using it myself, just using the spreadsheet. I think it works great. Yeah. But for those of you who wants to use some tech.
So at least take a peek at the spreadsheet to like see what we're trying to get at the end. And then you might be able to, insert some of that into some of those tech tools as well.
Yes, you guys will find all the links to download this what we're talking about in the show notes, and you will access the Clockwork kit, which has in it the time tracker, but also several other things that has been mentioned in the Clockwork book. So you'll really find lots of value from downloading that. And so, Adrienne, before we close, how can people reach out and how can people learn more from you?
Yeah, so they can go to runlikeclockwork.com. That's probably the best place for them to find the free kit that you're talking about, as well as we have a podcast if they want to dive deeper into some of these topics. We have a program called the Accelerator, which Gianmarco is in, that you can find access to all of those things on runlikeclockwork.com. You can find a link to the book if you've never read the book yet. All of those are great places to start. So runlikeclockwork.com is the main hub.
That's great. I really, guys, suggest you to read the book, and as well as checking out all the resources that Adrienne is giving in the website. And remember, guys, that the key to success is to emulate the best. So really follow what the efficiency expert Adrienne is suggesting now, and go apply it in your business. So Adrienne, it was really a pleasure to have you here. Thank you very much, and I hope to see you again in maybe a future episode.
Yes, thank you for having me. It was fun.
Hey entrepreneurs, I hope you enjoyed the show and learned something from the interview. Subscribe to this channel so you won't miss the next episodes, and remember to go grab the free downloads of this episode at thesellerprocess.com. And don't forget to sign up to our free email list to get the latest systems and SOPs shared exclusively with our subscribers. Thanks for watching, and see you soon.